Friends, the time has finally come. For 11 months now, I feel like I have been sitting down to talk about the new releases that are coming out in the upcoming month, and I always sit down saying, oh, I thought that this was going to be a light month, and then I really dug into the books, and it is not, in fact, a light month, but it is December, the one month at this point we are almost guaranteed a slow month, and I am here to let you know that it is indeed a slow month. That doesn't mean we don't have books to talk about, and that doesn't mean that there isn't a highly anticipated release yet this month, but it does mean that we're not going to be fighting through like 40 plus titles. That being said, as always, there will be titles that I miss or just aren't on my radar like they may be on yours, so let me know what you're excited about, whether we talk about it today or not. And while we're on the subject, like and subscribe if you feel like it. It really does help me out. But without further ado, let's jump in to the new releases of December, the last month of 2023, which also means we have successfully talked about the anticipated releases every month this year. And I'm going to give myself a little virtual pat on the back for that one because I wasn't sure if I was going to be able to pull it off, and I did. So here we are. And the first new release Tuesday of the month, December 5th, also happens to be my baby brother's birthday. So happy birthday, Justin, who is not watching this. But to start it off, we have Technically Yours by Denise Williams. This will be a romance-heavy month, just to give you the heads up right off the bat, and this is indeed a romance. Now, while I am not caught up on all Denise Williams's romances, I have read at least 2 of them, and I've really enjoyed them. And this seems to involve a second chance romance with our protagonist Pearl, who is brought on to run a nonprofit that is going through a crisis. What she doesn't anticipate is that one of the new board members will be a former flame of some kind. Lord mentions her meeting this board member Cord in an elevator 7 years ago, and that she broke his heart, and that this gives them a second chance at romance. So I'm not sure how involved this relationship was. Based on the blurb, it seems to be a meet cute that just didn't develop. However, there does seem to be this indication that they kind of knew each other, there were sparks flying, and the fact that he got his heart broken in some way leads me to believe that there may have been a deeper connection there, so I'm unsure. But the second chance that they've been given means that this also would be a workplace romance, which will further complicate things, especially with the reputation of this institution that already seems to be on shaky ground in the mix. So very interested to see what this is going to be. My first book from her actually was also kind of a workplace romance, though that was a one-night stand that turned into more, and then also the revelation that they were going to be kind of co-workers in some capacity. And I also read her book, The Fastest Way to Fall, which is a Cyrano type love story. I don't remember if the blurb for this book specifically mentioned, but I've also enjoyed the books I've read from her in the past because they are set in Chicago, so that has been a fun element. Additionally, I'm interested in this one because one of the glories of aging is that you become more interested in contemporary romances for the jobs the characters are doing as much as anything sometimes. Or maybe that's just me, but I'm very interested to see the nonprofit world within the book because the nonprofit world is a very interesting space. And the nonprofit in this book involves, if I did not mention it before, teaching high schoolers to code. So there's this element of STEM as well, and a woman leading a STEM non-for-profit that could become a little bit more complicated, especially with this relationship with a board member. So there's a lot to unpack there for sure. I'm sure once we read the book, we can unpack it further. But then that's not the only book coming out on the 5th. We also have How to Reread a Novel by Matthew Clark. Now, I don't know a whole lot about this one. I know nothing about the author. I just saw it on Edelweiss, and I enjoyed the books like How to Read a Novel Like a Professor or How to Read Literature Like a Professor back in the day. In fact, in my AP Lit class, we had the table of contents, just the table of contents of How to Read Literature Like a Professor, and we analyzed a lot of our texts through the ideas those chapters were based around. I have both my copies of those books in my childhood bedroom, so if we're interested, I can kind of assess over Christmas and see if we want to dig into those again. But I am interested to see what kind of angle this takes because I think in my head, I am thinking of it similar to those books, and I don't think that that's necessarily going to be what this is. I think it's going to take a historical approach in some points, but again, that is me just kind of conjecturing based on the blurb. Where I'm getting that is the blurb talking about him making his case through the exploration of things like rhetorical tradition. So we'll be interested to see how kind of accessible that is, or if it is a lot denser, but I think there's definitely a real interest in the idea of rereading right now, and there is a lot of friction, I think, in the current dialogue around reading and how to be a reader, and this idea of challenges and pushing ourselves as readers. And I think we have this kind of false dichotomy, as we have in a lot of things, that you should either be reading the most books you possibly can, or you need to be really sitting and digging deep into the text and reading and rereading and finding every little thing you can glean from it in order to be a good reader. And as you can probably guess, if you've hung out with me for a bit, I don't think that reading exists on either extreme. I think there's a very valid case for wanting to read as many stories as you possibly can, just simply because you enjoy stories. But I also believe that there is great value in sitting with a text and analyzing it and thinking about the intention and the craft of storytelling. And also, most importantly, I think, as the blurb brings up, kind of finding new things every time you revisit a text, and just this idea that you're not going to find everything on the first read of a text. I also think that there is a lot of pressure to be able to articulate things fully on a first read, or maybe that's just an internalized pressure I'm feeling, but just this idea that you're going to discover new things every time you revisit something. And sometimes that's simply based on being older when you're rereading, having a different life experience and a new perspective to bring to the table. So I'm just very interested in how this is going to approach the conversation and what it ultimately has to say. But I do think December is the right time to release this, because I personally am generally in a more reflective mood, and I think that you are more likely to kind of sit with your reading life and think about these things in a little bit more depth. But again, maybe that's just me. And then a surprise release for me in that I had seen nothing about this book until I saw it when I was looking up what was releasing this month. And then I feel like I've seen some posts in trickles about it, and maybe that is just because now it's on my radar, to be fair. But The Ruined by Renee Ahdieh, which is the fourth and I believe last in the YA The Beautiful series, which started with The Beautiful, went on to The Damned, still love that, still perfect, and then moved on to last year's, which I have not read, The Righteous, and then The Ruined. So I do like that we still have that kind of mirroring in the secondary part of this series. I appreciate that. And part of the reason I find this so interesting, that this is releasing in December with seemingly not as much fanfare, is because when The Beautiful came out, it had a huge marketing and PR push, and it really was being framed as the return of vampires in YA. And I personally was really excited for it because I enjoy Ahdieh, I enjoy vampires, and it had a historical twist to it. And to my recollection and my rating on Goodreads, because 2019 somehow feels like a lifetime ago at this point, I really enjoyed The Beautiful. I didn't so much enjoy The Damned, which is probably why I haven't gotten to The Righteous yet. Also because The Righteous seems to be a kind of splintering of the main story, at least as we had it in The Beautiful and The Damned, and so we're following a different character that then brings everything full circle. It seems like we're going to bring the Fae more into things here, which I find interesting because we launched this series kind of with the revitalization of vampires, bringing vampires back, and it didn't stick as much as I think they thought it was going to, but the Fae have been very popular in the last decade or so, and so we then have the introduction of the Fae. Now, I'm not saying that that's the only reason it's there, because they were already part of the world, and it really was kind of spreading out into this more sprawling kind of urban fantasy, kind of in the vein of the young adult fantasy I would have been reading as a teen, or things like Karen Marie Moning. So it's definitely still in line with the tone of the original books. I just find it really interesting, but it is kind of a bummer to see it coming out in December without much of a push, simply because it feels like publishing's way of saying that this series did not perform the way they wanted it to. So I will be very interested to see the reception of this book. If you have been a big fan of this series, if you are still anticipating this book, I would love to hear your thoughts on this. And I'm also very, very interested to know what Ahdieh is going to do next within the YA space, or if she's going to branch out into the adult space. And then last on the 5th, we have a thriller, I know, shocker, Here in the Dark by Alexis Salasky. What is probably not as much of a shocker is that it has a theater bend to it, and it involves a former actress turned ruthless theater critic whose most recent interviewee that she only agreed to because she's angling for a promotion turns up missing, and this leads her to playing a part in an attempt attempt to solve this disappearance, especially as this conversation turned up some long buried secrets that she'd been holding on to. So I'm very interested in this and how accurate it's going to feel to the theater scene, I think, more than anything. For instance, the blurb mentions that she's a junior theater critic at a major Manhattan magazine, and we all know, I think at this point, that magazines haven't been having a whole lot of luck lately, so the idea that they could employ multiple theater critics is interesting to me. So I guess more than the thriller part of this book, I am much more interested in the theater angle and whether it's going to read true. However, that being said, there are a lot of people within the theater world that also cross over into the book world. So there's definitely still some hope that this is going to feel familiar in the reading experience. And then December 12th, we have one release I have my eye on, which is Game On. This is the author of The Love Con, which is still sitting on my TBR, but it looks like a delight, and I've seen people that have really loved that book and the experience of it, and the experience of like nerd culture within that book, because book one is about cosplay, but book two, which doesn't seem to be connected directly to book one to my kind of initial perusal, is a kind of antagonists to allies to lovers scenario, because our protagonist Samara has built a following under an anonymous screen name, and she ends up doing a review of a new popular game critiquing its representation, particularly for women. And after this, the video blows up and there is a significant outcry from female gamers about the representation in this game. And the CEO of the company behind the game ends up seeing this, is understandably not super happy, but he wants to fix what they got wrong with this representation and ends up hiring on Samara as a consultant. But as they get closer, presumably working on this game, they then have the element of like publicity around this potential relationship and outside eyes to deal with, and whether this relationship can weather that storm. So I'm really excited for and intrigued by this. I am not a gamer, admittedly, but I also love explorations of nerd culture, and also this book will seemingly be some nice wish fulfillment in terms of someone responding seemingly correctly to criticism and trying to right a wrong in the character design in this game. So very excited to see what this is going to look like. And then everyone seemingly took the 19th off for Christmas, and we are back on the 26th of December with the last new release Tuesday of 2023. The first book I have on my radar is On the Plus Side by Jenny Howe, and this seems to follow our protagonist Everly, who the blurb describes as navigating life as a neutral paint color, which is such a vivid description, I think. This idea that she's kind of living her life in ways where she won't be noticed, which involves not pursuing her art career and not nominating herself for the show she loves, and also kind of holding on to this unrequited crush on a coworker. Then somebody else nominates her for her favorite reality show On the Plus Side, which is seemingly a plus size makeover show, which seems to be a little bit what not to wear, and according to the blurb, also a little bit queer eye. So this idea that it is presumably kind of making over your entire life. But this means that she's going to be on screen and have to deal with putting herself out there when she has lived a life where she has made herself smaller and tried not to be noticed. But luckily, she also forms this friendship, and maybe more, with a grumpy cameraman. So she gains an ally, forms a friendship, and probably more, and discovers that maybe she doesn't mind being seen after all. And then our final anticipated release for the year, and a very much anticipated release at that, Ruthless Vows by Rebecca Ross, which seems to be the culmination of the series that started with Divine Rivals earlier this year. I'm kind of mind-boggled that they both came out this year, but at the same time, I feel like A River Enchanted and its sequel, A Fire Endless, both came out last year. So this seems to be the kind of schedule these releases are on. Hopefully we don't see any author burnout here, because I am loving these works, and I'm very excited by the idea that this is a duology. I mistakenly thought this was a trilogy, and so I think that there will be some wonderful symmetry, especially because, at least according to the blurb, the letters are coming back with Ruthless Vows. And so this book, trying to avoid as many spoilers as possible here, though of course the blurb does have some spoilers if you take a peek at it, involves our love interests finding, presumably, their way back to each other. We've got Iris at the front and Roman in capture, and maybe not remembering everything about what had transpired in book one, or how much does he remember at all, and will these letters that are finding their way back to him help him find his way back to himself? So very interested to see what this book is going to be. Divine Rivals really surprised me earlier this year, really delighted me. It shouldn't have surprised me because I loved A River Enchanted. I still need to read A Fire Endless because after the whole HarperCollins strike, I got behind, but it was a really lovely surprise. I am interested in it dropping so late in the year still based on how big Divine Rivals was. I'm betting, at least on some level, this is a bid for Christmas gift card money. Divine Rivals was so big, this will be an easy way to utilize those gift cards after the holidays. Additionally, because Divine Rivals was so big, this feels like more of a safe bet so late in the year. I'm very interested in why it's dropping here, but it dropping here feels much, much different than The Ruined dropping earlier in the month. So let me know what you're thinking. Let me know if you're as excited about this one as I am. Let me know if you're excited about any of the other books coming out this month or any of the books, as mentioned before, that we may have missed. But thank you, as always, for hanging out. Thank you for being interested in new releases and what new releases I'm interested in, whether it be just for this month or if you've spent more time with me over the course of the year. I very much appreciate you being here and want to make that very clear as we round out the end of the year here. But like I said before, go ahead and like if you feel like it, subscribe if you're not subscribed. Would love to have you hanging around through the new year. But next up is January anticipated releases, where we will surely be picking back up at full steam. So enjoy the lull. Let me know if there are other months anticipated releases you're going to catch up on in the meantime. But thank you as always for being here. Read something good, and yeah, bye.